Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the latest Birmingham Clean Air Zone briefing hosted by the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce. I'm Raj Kandola, Head of Policy at the Chamber. I would like to welcome you all to today's event. Now, as many of you know, the Chamber has worked very closely with the City Council over the last 2.5 years to help businesses prepare for the start of the zone, whether that's hosting briefing events such as this, a series of roundtables, workshops, and of course, the centrepiece of our work has been a business toolkit, which provided a raft of information as to how the zone would operate, but also information on where support mechanisms were available for businesses likely to be affected by the start of the zone. As we know, the zone went live on the 1st of June, and the purpose of today's event was really to hear from businesses themselves to find out what their feedback's been, whether they require any additional support or guidance moving forward, and if there's been any specific challenges which have arisen over the last few weeks. So in terms of a format for today's event, we were due to be joined by Councillor Zafar, who's the Cabinet Member for Transport and Environment at Birmingham City Council, but due to Eid-celebrations, he is no longer available to join us today, and I'm sure you'll wish him all well in enjoying today. We are now joined by Steve Arnold, who's the head of the Birmingham Clean Air Zone, and I'm sure he'll be able to answer the various questions that you might have running forward. So in terms of a format, very shortly I'll hand over to Steve. He'll run through a series of slides just touching upon the feedback from the last 6 weeks from a council perspective, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. As I said, leave your questions in the chat box. We'll attempt to get through all of them. If there is any that we're not able to answer, then we'll share them with the team and we can pick those up afterwards, and we'll aim to finish by 9:45 a.m. So without any further delay, I'd like to hand over to Steve. Steve, over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Raj, and thank you everybody for your time this morning. It's really appreciated, and it's really helpful to us as well to have these regular conversations, in particular with the business community and residents and other groups who are also potentially impacted by the Clean Air Zone. We've always said that we wanted to take a really fair and reasonable approach to this. We understand the potential impact this has on people, but we're also mindful as well about the desire, the need to improve air quality in the city and to help realise the health benefits that brings to people, but also to help create a much better environment for everybody that lives and works in the city. So yeah, once again, I really appreciate your time this morning. So in time-honoured fashion, or what has become time-honoured fashion, I will now try and share my screen. So let's just see if I can do that. Okay. Hopefully everybody can see my presentation. I'll just put that into presentation mode.
Yeah, we can see it, Steve.
Brilliant. Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much. Okay, so yes, so I'm Steve Arnold. I'm the head of Clean Air Zone at Birmingham City Council. So the Clean Air Zone went live on the 1st of June, and as I said, the rationale for the Clean Air Zone is to address the air quality challenge that we have in the city. If you're not already aware, we have a problem with nitrogen dioxide in particular. We have a number of locations, and in particular within the area bounded by the Clean Air Zone, that are above the legal limit for nitrogen dioxide, and so there's a real compelling reason to introduce the Clean Air Zone, and the other compelling reason to introduce the Clean Air Zone is because it addresses the source of the problem, and the source of the problem is motor vehicles. The 80% of roadside nitrogen dioxide is produced from vehicle exhausts. So the Clean Air Zone addresses the source of the problem by applying a daily fee to the most polluting vehicles on the road. And poor air quality disproportionately impacts the young, the old, people living in deprivation. It also disproportionately affects the lives of professional drivers, and as I said, the young in particular are a real area of concern, because they're 3 times more likely to have impaired lung function as a result of poor air quality. So there's as I said, there's a real compelling need here to do something. The other thing, and let's be brutally honest about this is that the council, Birmingham City Council, and a number of other councils around England were given a ministerial direction from DEFRA to take action, and the language in the ministerial direction was to take action to ensure compliance within the shortest possible time. And it's important to remember that last phrase, shortest possible time, and that's driven a lot of the thinking here around the clean air zone, because it does help us to address the source of the problem in the shortest possible time. So the clean air zone is an area within the A4540, the middleway. It's a type D clean air zone, and it's the first type D clean air zone. It's very, very similar in terms of the categories of vehicles that are included to London's ULEZ, but the clean air zone program is separate to the program within London. It's the daily fee that applies is £8 for cars, taxis and vans, £50 for coaches, HGVs and buses. It operates 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, and importantly, there's a 13-day payment window for drivers. So 6 days before the day of travel, the day of travel, and then 6 days after the day of travel. And before we introduced the clean air zone, we also put in place a really extensive package of exemptions and financial incentives to either give people more time to prepare for the clean air zone, or to help support and accelerate that the upgrade and replacement of some of those more polluting vehicles, those vehicles that would be more likely to be eligible for the daily fee. And we've had some really positive progress in those areas. And the next slide, I'll give you an update really in terms of where we're up to with some of those packages. So in terms of temporary exemptions, we are now above 7,000 permits. At the end of May, we were at roughly 5,300, and then at the end of June, we were at around about 6,700. So we continue to see growth really in the volume of applications for exemptions, and we're continuing to process those and get those in place for people. And it was really interesting, actually. We had a number of soft deadlines in the run up to the launch of the Clean Air Zone, just trying to encourage people to get those exemptions in. But what we saw from the end of May through to the end of June was a really, really significant ramp up of the volume of applications coming in for exemptions. The numbers were something like, I think we processed some 1,400 applications in a month, and that was the single biggest month in terms of volumes for exemptions. And again, part of that was just to ensure that people had a little bit of extra time if they needed it to just get ready and to think about the options for doing something different. As far as the taxi scheme is concerned, we've now provided funding to over 1,000 drivers, and we're around about £2 million in terms of grants paid out. And what we're seeing with some of the numbers in terms of compliance is that within the private hire fleet, there's a really, really positive uptake in terms of upgrades and replacements. So the private hire fleet is a lot cleaner now. There's still some work that we think that could be done with the Hackney carriage fleet. So we're working really closely with them. And now that some of the restrictions around face-to-face contact have been eased, members of my team are now going out and doing drop-in sessions with Hackney carriage drivers, etc., just to try and help to get them into much more cleaner vehicles. As far as the heavy duty vehicle fund is concerned, we have now paid out, or we're in the process of confirming funding to around about £1.6 million. It's been challenging in this area, I'll be quite honest, and some of those challenges have come about through the need to comply with the state aid rules. And I think in a previous update that we did around this, we were talking about how the state aid rules had fallen away, and there was now a new subsidy control regime that was in place, and the parliamentary bill around subsidy control regime went to Parliament 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we've been working really closely with our legal services just to understand where we think we've got some additional flexibility in that scheme. So we're expecting to make some announcements around that in the not too distant future, and we think they'll be really positive. The vehicle scrappage scheme launched in May. We've so far had 49 applications approved. We've had more applications than that, but we've approved 49, and we've actually started to approve and send out the car and travel credits, and people are taking up the mobility credit as well. Well, and what we expect with this one is that because a lot of the people that are potentially eligible for that financial scheme will have a temporary exemption in place, we expect that the applications and the interest in that scheme will start to increase as the temporary exemption for workers in the clean air zone moves towards its end, 12 months after the launch of the clean air zone. And there's also medical vouchers in place for visitors to the Children's Hospital and a couple of medical centres within the clean air zone, and we've processed around about 2,500 of those. So that's working, and that's really positive. So we've been really pleased with that so far. But we still think, again, we're continuing to really monitor those, how those are going really closely, and we're also working a lot on the back office processes so that we can get through those applications as quickly as possible. Because again, while we're processing those applications, people are potentially continuing to have to pay the daily fee, and we want to try and reduce that as much as possible. The other reason for trying to remove those polluting vehicles from the road is that if we do that quicker, that also then helps us to achieve compliance more quickly as well. So in terms of lessons learned, I think there's a number of things that we're seeing really. In terms of some of the data that we're seeing from the clean air zone, and we are due to publish our first monthly fact sheet very, very shortly, either later this week or early next week. So I'm happy to provide a little bit of guidance really in terms of some of the numbers that we're seeing, but that it will just be guidance because we're still going through the process of validating some of those numbers. But at the moment we're seeing around anywhere between 90 to 100,000 unique vehicles traveling through the clean air zone each day, which is a significant volume, especially when you compare that to London's ULEZ. What we're also starting to see is that the percentage of non-compliant vehicles traveling through the clean air zone is reducing, which is positive. And again, that's the part of the rationale for the clean air zone. And the percentage of non-compliant vehicles at the moment appears to be lower than what we'd originally modelled. We'd originally modelled around about 25% of vehicles travelling through the clean air zone would potentially be subject to the daily fee. At the moment, that figure's less. And that's even if you include the exemptions that are in place for non-compliant vehicles. And at the moment, around 80% of all the vehicles traveling through the clean air zone on a daily basis are passenger cars, with LGVs and vans accounting for around about 9 to 10% roughly. So together that gives us around about 90% of the volume of vehicles traveling through the clean air zone. So again, we're processing that data, we're looking at that data, we're trying to understand if there are any patterns, but it is really, really early. And we don't think necessarily that we'll start to see a more of a normal pattern until we get to September, and that seems to be something we're hearing back from a lot of other stakeholders as well, and I'll be really keen to hear your views on that as well, especially as the latest lot of COVID restrictions were eased at the beginning of this week, but again there's potentially the prospect of something further down the road. So again, it's a bit of a mixed bag at the moment. It's really difficult to kind of look into the future and see what will actually happen. In terms of common customer queries, we know that some people are still getting to grips with the business account function, and that's something we're working really closely with the government and their partners on. The government is responsible for the payment portal. We pay them for that service, but it's absolutely something we're feeding back to them, and they're picking that up from their own source as well, and that's something we'll definitely try and work on a little bit more closely. I think the other thing is to consider is that now that Birmingham's Clean Air Zone is live, Bath has also launched its Clean Air Zone. That was launched on the 15th of March. Portsmouth is due to launch its Clean Air Zone in the autumn of this year. That's a Type B Clean Air Zone. Bristol are now looking to launch its Type D Clean Air Zone in possibly later this year, but I think some of the media coverage we've seen from them suggests that maybe that actually may be early 2022. Greater Manchester is due to launch its Clean Air Zone in 2022. Bradford, Sheffield, Newcastle, and then slightly further down the road, Liverpool is also exploring a clean air zone. We also know that London's ULEZ is due to expand in October, and there's a couple of cities in Scotland as well that are also exploring low emission zones for their city centres. So the point I raised there is that this type of scheme is coming to cities across the country. It doesn't always work for every city, and every city that is looking to tackle air quality challenges is having to adopt a different set of strategies, a different set of tactics based on local issues. And that's the really important thing to remember. The Type D Clean Air Zone for Birmingham, we believe is the right way, is the best way for us to address the source of the problem and to achieve compliance in the shortest possible time. Other cities will take a slightly different approach to addressing that challenge. So in terms of next steps, I think previously we've talked about the program to deploy the fast and rapid EV charging points. We're also working on a strategy to deploy up to 9,000 additional charging points around the city. That's part of a partnership with ESB, who deployed charging points in London and also Coventry. We think that's really positive. The most immediate priority within that, the Fast and Rapid program, is to replace or upgrade the legacy charging points that we've got, because the technology in those charging points is now out of date. It's a complicated piece of work, if I'm really honest. There's a lot of liaison with our own departments, and there's a lot of work with the likes of WPD, the distribution provider for the region, and ESB, the provider, and stakeholders and things like that. But we are making progress with that, so that's really positive. The other big area of activity in the future is that, and again I think we've talked about this in the past, is that the Clean Air Zone is an enabler for other significant strategies such as Birmingham's transport plan, and the updated version of that is due to be published towards the back end of this year. I think it's in the autumn, but that will set out a number of additional measures to help address other areas to help improve traffic flow, focus much more on the movement of people rather than cars and things like that. The Clean Air Zone is also an enabler within the Route to Zero initiative, so that's another positive area. The other area that we're really keen to do as well is, especially in the run-up to September, is work with a lot of the public transport providers to help encourage people back into public transport, take some of the load off the roads. We appreciate that's not always going to be the right solution for everybody, but public transport is there as an option, and it will be there for some time. And National Express West Midlands just a couple of days ago made some announcements about reductions to their fares, so it makes it easier to get into that and to use that. And I think the other two big areas for the Clean Air Zone program going forward really are the ongoing monitoring of air quality and traffic. when we publish the fact sheet, or shortly afterwards, we'll publish our first air quality baseline report, and we'll be using that to measure progress and improvements in terms of air quality. We've also got an enhanced network of sensors out on the ring road and in other parts of the city to try and understand what, if any, displacement is taking place with traffic avoiding the clean air zone, because we know a number of people have been concerned about that. And the other area as well is that once we start to get the income and we can get that all reconciled, we'll then start to set out our plans for how that money will be spent. It all has to be spent on transport related projects and policies, as I've said before, but we want to share more information about that. We've set out some outlines previously within cabinet reports, which are all publicly available, but we need to do a little bit more around that once we actually know how much we think we're going to have. And the important thing is that we'll only be spending the money that we actually get, which we'll have to see what that actually turns out to be. So hopefully that provides you with a very broad update on where we're up to with the clean air zone, some of the early lessons learned and some of the early data that we're starting to see from the clean air zone, but also how we plan to be taking some of this forward. So hopefully that's giving you whetted your appetite, and I look forward to some interesting questions.
Thank you, Steve. That was a really helpful update. I think there's a few key points that are worth kind of highlighting. So interesting to see that the percentage of non-compliant vehicles seems to be lower than expected, but as you said, there could be extenuating circumstances around that. And interesting to see what the direction of travel is, no pun intended, once national restrictions continue to ease. Good to see as well, there's been a notable upturn in the number of individuals and organisations applying for support as well. That's one thing that we were keen to keep a track on. And then finally as well, interesting to see that people are still getting to grips with the payment system. I know obviously before the zone went live, we had some concerns around how businesses would comply with the additional compliance from a financial perspective, but also from a time perspective as well. So interesting points all there as well. So we've got a couple of questions coming, which we'll kick off with. So the first one was from Jackie Datt, who asked, in terms of the short-term exemptions which were provided in June for those working in the city, there have been issues raised for those who share cars with parents and partners. Is there a specific reason why those who can prove they reside at the address on the V5C and also prove they work in the city centre were not able to get the exemptions without being told they have to change the name on the V5C?
Okay, so I think if I understand that question correctly, so the eligibility criteria for that particular exemption is based on the registered owner of the vehicle. So if somebody is perhaps the user of the vehicle but not the registered keeper, then as the eligibility criteria is concerned, they would not be eligible. So what we've been trying to do is to help people to be eligible and provide some advice around that. It doesn't always work for everyone. We absolutely understand that. But if that is an option for somebody, then that is the way to become eligible for it. Again, it's something that we're reviewing and we continue to review. But that is the eligibility criteria. If I've understood the question correctly.
Yeah, I think so. But if there's anything else that you think we can be doing to broaden that eligibility or help those who kind of fall through the cracks like that, that'd be really good to discuss.
Well, yeah, I mean, the interesting thing that we've seen with the exemptions is that I think around about 60% of all the temporary exemptions that are in place are for workers. And then there's an additional 30% for residents. So a lot of people are getting those exemptions. So, yes, with any particular scheme that has eligibility criteria applied to it, some people will not qualify. If there is an ability for us to flex that scheme or to think about that a little bit more, that's fine. We're happy to do that. But the criteria for those schemes are set down within the charging order. So and that's a legal document that we've had to put in place before the zone went live, because it sets the basis for how you're applying the fees and things like that. So if we were to make a change to that exemption, we would potentially have to go through a consultation process, because that could be seen as a material change. But again, that's why we're just trying to think about how the policy is applied.
Yeah, and again, if chamber members can feed into that, if there are any changes, then of course we'll keep sending that type of feedback to yourselves as well, to keep you in the loop. Because I think the point that obviously Jackie's making is that, you know, a number of people thought that the vehicle would be exempt, not the driver. And obviously she's mentioned the point that it's causing issues for a number of young professionals, unfortunately.
So it is correct. The vehicle is exempt, not the driver, but the vehicle has a registered keeper, and the two are connected. Yeah. So it is the vehicle exempt, because we record the registration details through the cameras.
Sure. Thank you for that. We've had another question from Chris Ashley from the Road Haulage Association, who says he wrote to councillors AFA in May to clarify funding arrangements for hire and reward operators. He's had a holding reply, but no kind of formal response. Is there any updates on this at all?
So I think this goes back to the comment I made earlier about the scheme was originally created to conform with the state aid regulations, which fell away as part of the what was it, the 31st of December, midnight on the 31st of December, as part of the Brexit agreement. The new subsidy control regimes that was put in place was on an advisory basis for the first part of this year, and interestingly, I think a lot the view that was taken was that it would be down to local authorities to interpret that in their own way, which could be positive or not, as the case may be. But like I said, there was a consultation that the government's run on the subsidy control regime. That's now been moved into legislation. The legislation's moved into Parliament. So we think that actually gives us quite a lot more flexibility. And as I said earlier, we've been working really closely with our legal services team to interpret those new rules and think about how we can flex that scheme. And I'm more than happy to go back to Chris outside of this and have a conversation with him about that.
Thanks, Steve. We've had a question from Matt Siboth, who says, has there been any issues with increased parking on the outskirts of the clean air zone? So thinking about kind of traffic displacement there and those types of issues. Yeah,
I think it's too early to say. We haven't, but to answer the question directly, we haven't seen anything. Nothing's been reported directly to me. But again, the situation we're in at the moment is unusual. Let's be honest about that. In terms of traffic across the whole of the network, it's running at around about 80% of pre-COVID levels at the moment. So there is reduced demand on the network anyway. So like we're saying, we're kind of looking towards September, really. Schools go back. Potentially there's a step change in how businesses and employees work and things like that. So, but we've got all the monitoring in place. We're ready to do something if we see that as an issue.
Thank you. We've had a question from Steve Cross as well, who asked, as the scheme is all about improvement in air quality, can you update us on the quantitative air quality measurements in the inner city over the last few weeks? Similarly, can you confirm how the air quality measurements have changed around the ring road? Bit of a technical question here.
So all of the live data that we captured through the continuous analyzers, and there's a number of those, not just within the clean air zone but around the city, all that data is published as it comes through. So there's a website called Birmingham Air Quality Monitoring, I think it is. I'll dig it out and I'll send it back out. So all that data's there, all that data's published. All the other data that we capture, which is through what are called diffusion tubes, and in total, if you take into account all of the continuous analyzers and the diffusion tubes, we've got 90 plus points where we're monitoring air quality, not just in the clean air zone, but across the whole of the city. All of that data is, just to be clear, the data from the diffusion tubes is published on on an annualized mean basis through the air quality annual status report. And the reason for that is that there's some guidelines from DEFRA as to how you capture and record and analyze that data. So, and again, all of that data for the last 6-7 years, I think, is published through the Air Quality Annual Status Report, and that's all available either on our .gov site or through this Birmingham Air Quality Monitoring website. And we are about to publish the air quality data for 2020, which will probably show improvements in air quality just because of the reduced volume of traffic.
Yeah, but I remember obviously the data that you released as well, which showed that traffic levels were pretty much back up to 90% of pre-pandemic by what, September last year, was it?
Yeah. Well, and interestingly as well, and again, this is where I'm really cautious about, making too many assertions about what is actually happening, because the volumes do go up and down over time. They are seasonal as well, and what you'll see is that when if it's more wet and things like that, traffic volumes go up because more people are using the car rather than walking, cycling, using public transport, things like that. But like I say, at the moment, what we're seeing is that, broadly speaking, overall traffic on the network is around about 80% of pre-COVID level.
We've got a similar question from Monica, who's asking, have you been recording the emission start since the start of the Clean Air Zone, or are planning on recording it later?
So yes. So again, just going back, we've got 90 plus monitoring points where we capture air quality data across the city. The baseline report that we'll be publishing what it will do, it will separate out the data that we've captured, which is all published through the Air Quality Annual Status Reports. It will separate out those monitoring points that are within the Clean Air Zone versus those points that are outside of the Clean Air Zone, so you could contrast and compare. But yeah, we do, and we are capturing it, and we're also putting in additional continuous analyzers as well to provide real-time data. But again, it's really important that with the air quality data, it fluctuates on an hour-to-hour, day-to-day basis, and that's the other reason that it's captured and reported on an annualized mean basis, so you can even out some of those really lows and really highs as well.
Yeah, thanks for that, Steve. We've had a question from Simon Hyde, who asks, what are the realistic timescales for council fleet to be decarbonised, and what funding is being made available to them? So a very topical issue right now as we try to build back better on sustainable methods.
Indeed. Thank you, Simon, for the question. Unfortunately, I'm not responsible, not unfortunately, but I'm not responsible for the council's fleet. But needless to say, I do have an interest in it, because we've got, I think, when I looked at this last year, I think we've got somewhere in the region of 900 to 1,000 vehicles in our fleet. The biggest number of vehicles are within our waste fleet, and our waste team have set out a strategy for upgrading and replacing those vehicles, and they've already started to do that. So the immediate object was to go to Euro 6. That's not necessarily a great step towards decarbonisation, but I do know that they're looking to electric for the rest of the fleet. But we also know that there are challenges in getting a lot of those vehicles replaced at the moment. There's chip shortages, there's extended supply chains, and that makes it challenging, not just for our fleet, but also, I'm sure, for all the other businesses that are on this call. The other thing to say would be that, decarbonising our fleet would be one of the objectives within our Route to Zero plan. But it also as well, it is also set alongside other priorities around housing. Housing in particular is probably the single biggest source of carbon. We have something like 60,000 properties that we own, and that's a massive source of carbon. We think that some really positive improvements could be made in that place.
Yeah, and obviously with Simon and his background with Fozola, who are obviously specialists in hydrogen, I think he'd be quite keen to have more conversations with people at the City Council about that agenda. So again, happy to
Yeah, we were more than happy to have that conversation, and not least because we, as part of the Clean Air Zone program, we funded the purchase of 20 hydrogen buses, which are going to be used by National Express West Midlands. So we are keen to do that. We invested in the refueling plant at Tyseley as well, because electric's not the only answer here. There's different energy types that will suit different uses, and that's just something that everywhere we're all going to have to get used to. It's going to be an interesting transition.
Yeah, no, very much so. So we've had a question here from Sapphire Products, who are asking, as a business owner outside the Clean Air Zone, we understand the reasons to charge for non-compliance vehicles entering. However, the payment system is flawed. There should be an auto payment system in place, especially for businesses who have registered vehicles on the Gov website. To negate additional admin, surely taking a payment automatically should be in place right now. Now, I appreciate, Steve, you're likely to say this is a question for DEFRA and central government, but did you want to just pick this up?
Yeah, no, I mean it's a really good challenge, and going back to the slides I was talking about before, it is an area where we have picked up feedback and we have fed that back to government, and it is something that does need to be explored. We absolutely get that. That's all I could say on that, really. But I absolutely get the challenge. I absolutely appreciate it.
And obviously, to the person who's put that question forward, the Chamber as well has picked up on that point and written to various government ministers, highlighting our concerns around the payment system. We understand why they're doing it, trying to obviously encourage behaviour change, but we do think from a practical point of view, there are going to be some substantive challenges, as you've mentioned there. We've got a question from Steve Cross again, who's saying, are there any plans to help workers in the nighttime economy? Many start work in the evening and then go home in the early hours and have to pay the penalty twice. For example, it'll be £16 for each night they work.
So on that, so yes, in that situation, if they were only working 2 days, yes, they would. But again, if they are earning less than £30,000 per annum, and they own a non-compliant vehicle, then they could be eligible for the worker exemption. So that's certainly something I'd be encouraging them to do. The other thing to note would be as well that it is that there is only one charge per day. So if they are working more than 2 days, so 3 days, etc., that evens out across that period. So I absolutely hear what you're saying, but that would only apply if they're only working one shift then. And then that's it for the rest of the week. If you're working multiple shifts over the course of the week and they are consistent across that, then it kind of evens itself out. The other thing I'd say is that the midnight to midnight charging period is consistent with all the other clean air zones. So that will be exactly the same for every other city introducing clean air zones. It's also consistent with London's ULEZ. And again, there is a consistency there.
Thank you, Steve. And we had a question from Mike Leonard, who's asking, how are we measuring indoor air quality in the zone? It's a slightly different point, I guess, slightly outside the remit of Birmingham City Council, but yeah, interested to hear your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Mike. Yeah, so Mike and I have had conversations about this in the past, and it is an area that personally I think is something that we are going to have to explore more, and in particular, it is linked, I think, to the decarbonisation agenda. And what Mike and I have talked about in the past is that there, especially for properties close to busy roads, there is leakage of emissions, vehicle emissions into those properties. So that's something to consider. I think the other thing to consider as well is that as you try and reduce energy bills, and in some instances that's meant super insulating properties, so you get enclosed spaces and things like that then potentially worsens your air quality problem in buildings as well. And as I said before, we've got 60,000 properties, so that's a huge number of tenants. So my personal view is it is something that will move up the agenda over time, but at the moment it's not a legal obligation on us, and I'll be brutally honest, it's not something that we do at the moment.
Thanks, Steve. We've had a question from Amish, who's asking, are the exemptions going to be extended after the first year?
At the moment, we've got no plans to do that. So the worker exemption, so there's two types of exemptions that are in place. There are permanent exemptions, and in the main, those are managed through national databases. So those cover things like emergency vehicles, specialist vehicles, vehicles with disabled passenger tax class, community vehicles, those sorts of things. So there are some permanent exemptions in place, just to be clear. For the worker exemption, that's in place for 12 months from the 1st of June. For the residents, it's 2 years from the 1st of June, but no, there's no plans to extend those. Because again, the goal here is to achieve compliance in the shortest possible time. So there has to be a time limit to some of those exemptions. But with everybody that's made has had an application approved, we'll be contacting them, reminding them that the exemption will run out, and trying to encourage them to think about doing something different. And in particular with the scrappage scheme, seeing if it just encouraging people to think about that, think about some alternatives before the exemption runs out.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And a couple of questions I've got for myself to follow up on that point. I think it's probably worthwhile kind of reminding people that obviously it's the exemptions for those earning less than £30,000 a year. And I think the average salary in Birmingham is at £21,000 a year when you guys
something like that. Yeah.
One question I had though was around the original timeframes to achieve compliance, which obviously were set pre-pandemic. I mean, how have those kind of timelines changed since the onset of COVID, would you say?
Practically, yes. So the original plan was for the zone to go live in January 2020, with compliance starting to occur towards the end of 2021, but full compliance was not expected to be achieved until those temporary exemptions started to be lifted. So 2 years after, or 2 years after. So simplistically, because we've launched 1st of June, you then shift those compliance date 18 months to the right. It's not as simple as that, unfortunately, because compliance, the natural upgrade of the fleet will have improved during that period, during that 18 months. The working patterns, we don't know whether or not those have been permanently changed by COVID. So again, that's something to consider. It may be sooner, it may be later, but it's around, we feel it's around that sort of period of time. But again, the Clean Air Zone is there to help us achieve compliance and ensure that it's sustainable. And that's what we've got the mandate for.
Yeah, no, I think just a follow-up point related to that. I think one of the elements that we pushed for as a chamber prior to the start of the zone was just very much transparency around obviously the revenue that was generated from the Clean Air Zone and where that was being put back into transport projects across the city. Can you just touch upon that as well?
Yeah, in a number of cabinet reports that we've published in the run-up to the launch of the Clean Air Zone, we have started to identify potential uses for that income. But again, the point to stress is that by law or by the regulations, we have to reinvest all the income generated once we've taken out the operating expenses directly into transport related strategies and policies. That's it. That's what it has to be done. That's what has to be done. So what we've started to do is identify some potential areas where some of that money could be used, such as cross-city bus. We've earmarked some money for upgrades to the Camp Hill train station, University train station, and some other things like that. But again, it's all on the basis that that income actually arrives. And it's a bit of a weird situation to be in, because actually a really successful Clean Air Zone scheme would generate no income because you'd achieve compliance and you would do it almost immediately. However, we don't expect that to, and obviously the numbers are suggesting that we're not. So we are going to generate some income, and we will be absolutely transparent about where that money is going to be spent and how it's being spent as well.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, obviously as well, Steve, you mentioned the Bath Clean Air Zone went live prior to Birmingham. I mean, could you share any kind of learnings that you had from that from the scheme going live in Bath and how that's influenced what's happening in Birmingham moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the more immediate things that we saw from that were drivers getting used to the payment system, and that helped to influence the approach that we took to the launch. We understood from some of the feedback they were getting that, and this kind of goes back to the auto pay kind of thing, people were expecting to get some kind of notification, some kind of text, some kind of email that would say that they had to pay, the daily fee and that kind of thing, and they didn't. And so that generated penalty charge notices, and then you have to deal with that. So the strategy, or the tactics, I suppose, that we used for the launch were operational on the 1st of June, use the publicity from that to remind people about how the payment system worked, encourage more people to apply, with payments launching on the 14th of June, and that's been really positive. Actually, we think, based on some of the early behaviours we've seen, that's had a positive impact. I think the other really interesting thing that we saw from Bath was the really important need to just try and differentiate between the impact that the clean air zone has on changes in traffic or driver behavior. So people using rat runs around the zone to avoid the zone and things like that, versus other things that are going on within the area. We know that they had a little bit of local challenge around from some residents concerned that drivers were using their neighborhoods as rat runs and things like that, but when they actually did the analysis, that wasn't actually the case. And I think for Birmingham at the moment, one of the things we're really conscious of is that there's a huge amount of activity. There always is a huge amount of activity, because the city is growing, it's continuously developing, we're getting ready for the Commonwealth Games next year, so there's a huge amount of activity that's going on. So any sorts of changes in traffic patterns may not necessarily be just to do with the CAS, and that's going to be really, really difficult for us, is to differentiate the impact of the clean air zone on traffic patterns versus other things that are going on. And we think as well, it's probably the same as well around economic impact. And again, that's another area that we want to have a look at, is just try and see if we can differentiate between the direct impact of the clean air zone versus the other things that are going on, COVID, and how deep and how long is that impact, things like that.
Yeah, I guess when it comes to an economic perspective, that's looking at both good and bad, I'm guessing, right? So yeah, that makes sense. So
yeah, absolutely.
Now, you mentioned earlier as well the strategy around electric charge points. Could you go into that in a bit more detail? Because I think some of the previous sessions we've held before, the question has always been around, well, where are they going to be placed? Will they be placed throughout Birmingham, not just concentrating on the city centre, which is an important point, but also the charging capacity as well?
Yeah. The short-term strategy that we've got is focusing on fast and rapid, and the reason for that is down to the funding that we got. The funding we got from OLEV was to focus on the taxi community, and they need fast and rapid charging points just because of the way in which it's used. However, there is also the fact that there aren't enough fully electric taxis to use the capacity that will be in that network. So what we've been able to do is negotiate that those charging points, when they're in place, will be publicly available as well. So the priority with those, as I said before, was to either upgrade or replace legacy charging points, because we know that a lot of them no longer work and no longer use the latest sort of technology. So that's been the most immediate priority. Then what we then have done is generated a very long list of potential locations, which is based on the driver patterns for the taxis. Needless to say, there is a focus on city centre locations, but they are actually other locations outside of the city centre, such as Harborne and things like that. So we work through that very, very long list. We then go through a process of sifting with colleagues in planning, highways, as I said before, with the likes of the energy distribution provider, to identify priority locations, and then again we just keep sifting through that, because some may potentially be achievable in the short term, but then once you get onto site, there's a number of other reasons why you can't do that, so they then move down to the bottom of the list. So it's a constant review, but like I said, the plan is to deploy close to 400 fast and rapid charging points by the end of 2022, and then sort of towards the end of this year, we'll be publishing a strategy to then deploy up to 9,000 additional charging points in other parts of the city. And again, what we're trying to do is, and this is a bit similar to the conversation we had before about the use of hydrogen, is that fast and rapid is great for one kind of use, but if you're in a residential area, you need a different kind of technology, because you tend to be charging overnight, so it's lower power and things like that. So yeah, so it's really interesting actually, and it's really it's a good way of just trying to encourage that change.
Yeah, completely. I think it's an industry and an area which will obviously keep evolving and changing over the next few years, and its importance will become even more apparent as we move forward. I mean, I was going to mention as well just a couple of anecdotal examples of feedback we've had from members in relation to the start of the zone. So not on the call today, but we've had one of our members who recruit for construction workers mentioning that in order to travel through the zone, they've been asking for an increase in their day rate of their pay, so they can actually pay for the to use the zone itself, which is an interesting one. But also some issues around kind of leasing vehicles as well. And just some of the issues around, people who have got a backlog of trying to get the vehicles because of shortages that we talked about, not obviously related to the Clean Air Zone, but broadly around, kind of COVID, around vehicle shortages. I don't know if you want to touch upon that at all.
Yeah. Again, it is something that we're looking at really closely. And we really do understand the challenges. And one of the things that we did prior to the launch of the Clean Air Zone was, and this was within the charging, excuse me, within the charging order, was we provided an additional temporary exemption for people for businesses who had successfully applied to the to either the heavy duty vehicle fund or even the taxi scheme. So if they'd had a successful application and they were waiting on a vehicle or a retrofit or whatever it happened to be, then we would give them a temporary exemption on that non-compliant vehicle, just recognizing some of the challenges within the supply chain at the moment. I think the other thing with where leases are in place on vehicles that are based within the Clean Air Zone, there is a commercial vehicle exemption, so certainly explore that. It may not work for everybody, but it is there. I think the one area that we do need to have a little bit of a look at is that gap between a longer term lease and then shorter term use, and in particular with hire. I think similar to probably the sort of feedback you're getting, we understand that some of the hire companies are providing non-compliant vehicles. Now that seems a bit counterproductive, and it's something that I just want to explore a little bit more. So yeah, so we'll have to have a look at that.
Yeah, well, we're happy to put you in touch with members that have obviously raised that point with us directly, so you can take the conversation forward as well, try and find some solution to that. I mean, I just obviously, we've got a few minutes left, so just one last question I had really was around the uptake of travel credits, because I know historically, I think there's that stat, isn't there, that I think that a number of car journeys in Birmingham are less than 2 miles in length, and I know that obviously the council are really keen to target those people making those kind of short trips. But could you just touch upon that as well?
Yeah, so through the scrappage scheme, there's two options that applicants can go for. The first is to scrap a non-compliant vehicle and then use the £2,000 towards a compliant vehicle, and that's through Motorpoint. Or they can choose to scrap a non-compliant vehicle and then take the travel credit option. the majority of people are choosing to scrap a car and then replace it with a compliant vehicle, and I think that's understandable. But we are seeing a smaller number of people taking the mobility credit option, and what we're wanting to do is to talk to those people a little bit more, just better understand why they made that choice, what were the drivers for, sorry, again, no pun intended, but what were the drivers for them, you know, and then also talk to them about their experience of using the mobility credit, because that will help us to potentially promote that in a slightly different way, make that more attractive to people, work with the likes of TFWM, who are providing the travel credit scheme, to think about, you know, product improvements and things like that. But yeah, so while the majority of people are going for the car, which is completely understandable, some people are actually taking the mobility credit, and that's really positive, and we see that as a, you know, as a good start.
And have there been any kind of emerging trends amongst those people taking the credits then? Are they working in certain sectors, for example? Are they retired or?
Yeah, it's too early to say, unfortunately, because you know, like I said, I think earlier on the number of applications we've approved so far for that scheme is 49, so it's less than 50. So again, I'd be really cautious about trying to make any assumptions around particular sectors or anything like that.
No, makes sense. So we're coming up to the end of this session. I mean, any kind of final remarks from your side at this stage, Steve, before we finish up?
So yeah, I think the first thing I'd like to say is thanks once again to everybody who's joined the call this morning. Really appreciate your time, and really also appreciate the input that we've had prior to the launch of the Clean Air Zone. We've always said that we wanted to listen to people and adjust where we can. We do have some very clear objectives behind the Clean Air Zone scheme. You know, improve air quality, do so in the shortest possible time, realize those health benefits, but also encourage some changes in travel behaviors as well. Those won't be short term, those will take some time to occur. We absolutely have to recognize that, but we think we're off to a positive start. We also think that further improvements can be made to improve that user experience, make it a bit easier to use, perhaps. But again, as you yourself said, Raj, there is a balance to be struck about, you know, encouraging the change, but not making it too easy to avoid making the change and things like that. So that, again, that's a really difficult balance to get right. But as I said at the beginning, we've always wanted to be fair and reasonable in our approach to this. We recognize it is going to be difficult. You know, and that's just something that we're just gonna have to develop over time.
No, thank you, Steve. Really helpful. Yeah, well, I just want to say, look, thank you so much for everyone who's joined us on the call today. I think, just to echo Steve's point, really interesting questions put forward, really interesting points made. Again, if there's any specific questions or follow-up points that you want to make with the council, then please do get in touch with the Chamber team, and we can look to facilitate those questions and try and get those answers as well. And again, what we're keen to do is to keep this kind of dialogue open with Steve and his team. So again, we'd probably look to do similar events moving forward, because as you know, it's an evolving landscape. Things are going to happen. You know, that's not just the Clean Air Zone, but there's other factors, as Steve mentioned, which are going to impact the rollout of the zone moving forward as well. So again, if you've got any specific questions or queries, feedback, please do send them our way. And again, as I mentioned at the start of the session as well, we do have our business toolkit, which includes a raft of information on the running of the zone, the support mechanisms in place, and how you can spread the word about the zone itself. So please, again, if you haven't had the chance, do have a look at that and share amongst your networks. And all that's left for me to say is have a great day, enjoy the sun, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everyone. Cheers then.